Ladies and gentlemen, another lesson about your gut. Now, you have a very important organ that relies on behavior, and that organ is called the colon. Basically, your large intestines. That organ, you can easily train it to get a movement of the bowel at least once in a day or possibly twice in a day. But the more you train it to have an emptying or rather an evacuation every time, the more it gets used to that, and therefore it will give you reflexes to just empty the bowl every time. Okay, so possibly every time you eat. So it's very necessary that you train your bowl to at least have an evacuation and a full evacuation once a day. Now, these are some of the healthy behaviors that will help you get very good stool, a very free flowing and awesome bowel. Number one, rehydrate adequately with water and salt. Okay, and this will also help people who have hemorrhoids and people who constantly have prolapse and they keep complaining, even those who have chronic constipation. Start by dropping the inflammatory foods, the seed oils, the wheat products, and the sugars and the processed carbohydrates, and then now head straight to eating healthy. We've talked about healthy foods on this platform, so you can find those videos and watch them. But most importantly, as you hydrate, make sure you use salt. Because remember, the colon is an organ that relies on hydration and stimulation of the reflexes that are supplied to this organ by nerves. Okay, so salt is a very good stimulant of that reflex, but you need to stimulate it in a gradual way, and you need to develop active behaviors, healthy behaviors for that matter. So you don't have to stimulate it every time, every time. So again, water and salt, very important. Number two, train it to always have a bowel evacuation once a day. Now there are most of you, you don't have a trained boil. So anytime you just eat, your boil starts asking for an evacuation. Sometimes you go to places that you're not supposed to, or rather you're supposed to take some long period of time before you empty your boil. But you're there, your boil is asking you to empty it. And now that becomes problematic. So you need to train your boil to have at least one boil movement every day. Okay? And this is actually highly trainable. It's actually highly trainable. Okay, so do that, and then understand that the natural pooping position is the squatting. Now remember, your rectum has a muscle that like hooks it. So when you are squatting and your knees are facing upwards, it is easy for you to get a free flowing movement of the bowel. But when you're sitting on that toilet all the time, if you have a seated toilet, you can simply buy a stool, like a leg raise stool that will raise your legs so that your knees face upwards and you get a good bowel movement. But you know very well that sitting on a crown is not fancy. We were designed to squat to get a normal pooping position. And then limit medications. We take medications all the time. And when I'm talking about these medications, allow me to talk about the obvious ones, the purgatives, aka the laxatives, those medications that you use to empty your bowel. When you miss a stool for maybe 2 days, you're there taking lactulose or dulcolax or bisacodil to just empty. Some even take the castor oil to just empty your bowel. Remember this, most of these purgatives stimulate the reflexes and the nerves that supply the rectum. When they do that, your organ, that organ that we called the colon, we said it's an organ that relies on behavior. So every time you keep on stimulating it with drugs, it gets used to that. Now, once it gets used to that, it means you will hardly have a normal bowel movement or evacuation until you stimulate it with these drugs. And the weird part is, you guys are giving your children these purgatives all the time just because you feed them very bad foods. Then when they get constipation or they get a zero movement of the bowel, you're there giving them lactulose, and now their guts are developing. So imagine what you're doing to that child. The gut will incompletely develop, and that will be a problem. So how long do you want your child to stick on bowel evacuation through these laxatives? You need to unlearn some things. Okay, so stay away from laxatives unless they are very necessary. Medications for the gut, stay away from them unless they are very necessary and they are prescribed. Keep your children off laxatives and purgatives. Feed your children healthy foods so that they get a normal bowel movement. But most importantly, on those drugs, you see, as they stimulate that, they have very strong stimulation. We said if you want to stimulate the bowel, you need to stimulate it in a slow way and a steady and a gradual way, right? But these drugs come and stimulate it and then they are powerful. So the stimulations are very powerful, and you will end up getting your rectum coming out, which you call the prolapse. You'll also end up getting hemorrhoids. And when you get hemorrhoids, imagine if you have constipation, then you stimulate the bowel to just evacuate the hard stool. You're going to rupture the wall of the rectum, and that can expose you to infections. Also, that can expose you to the hemorrhoids. But the problem is, when you have these hemorrhoids, your doctor will go and tie them and then cut them off. Number one, more exposure to infection. Number two, imagine after you've woken up from that hemorrhoid surgery or hemorrhoidectomy, imagine your first movement of the bowel, your first evacuation. How will it feel? And stool is rich in microorganisms, is rich in fiber and all that. So not only will you be uncomfortable, you will also open up that wound and expose it to infections. So therefore, stay away from these purgatives. Simply eat healthy and your gut will do the rest. I thought you should know.